Shout out to James Wood. I know he's a big hip hop head and he's been wanting me to do this video for a while. I did actually do a couple of live streams where I talked about some of my favorite hip hop artists. But whenever you're doing a live stream, you can easily get distracted by people asking different questions in the chat room and all that. So I've decided to do a standalone video on hip hop and my favorite artists. So the best way to start would be to talk about the first time I ever heard hip hop music. So I grew up as a child in the 80s, and I do remember seeing this video on television, Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, The Message. It had a striking beat, a very memorable and iconic beat, and striking imagery in this video, of the ghetto and the slums and whatnot in New York. So I'd never seen New York City or that side of New York City before as a child. So I do remember seeing that video and the imagery definitely stuck in my head. But I was a young child at this point. I was old enough to watch TV and talk and walk and all that kind of stuff, but I was still a young child. Now, this came out, I want to say the late 70s, very early 80s, but it was still playing on television all the way through the 80s, definitely up until the mid 80s. They were still playing this on television. So I remember seeing this video. I also remember some of the early Run DMC. I remember seeing Walk This Way. This must have come out in the mid 80s, I'm guessing. Run DMC featuring Aerosmith. This was like a remake of the original Aerosmith song, I believe. So I remember seeing this video. I remember hearing the song. I remember hearing a bunch of other Run DMC songs like It's Like That, Sucker MCs, Christmas in Hollis, and a bunch of other Run DMC stuff. And it seemed cool at the time. I remember as a kid, it seemed cool, but I was never really taken with it to the point where I was trying to investigate and ask questions of my parents and my brothers, like who are these artists? Who is these rappers or whatever they are? I didn't even know how to describe them at the time, whether I would call them rappers or whatever they were, because hip hop was still a fairly new genre in the 80s. So a lot of people didn't know how to refer to rappers, whether they were singers or what they are, poets, God knows what. But anyway, yeah, so I thought the likes of Run DMC and Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five were cool, but they didn't perk my interest to the point where I wanted to start asking questions about them and finding out how do I, listen to more of their music. At the time, I was more into Michael Jackson, Bob Marley, because my mum was a big lover of like Motown and soul and stuff like that, R&B, and my dad was a big reggae man. So I was just pretty much into the same music as my parents. Yeah, and I loved Michael Jackson's music. I loved Bob Marley's music. I loved, loads of Motown and reggae and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, when Run DMC came along, it was cool, but yeah, I was never totally taken with it. Same with Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5. It's not until Public Enemy and De La Soul came to my attention that I really started properly listening and wondering who these people are, and I started latching on to certain songs of these particular artists, right? De La Soul came out, what says here, 87. So this was the late 80s. That's when a couple of groups first perked my interest properly and I really started wanting to listen to hip hop. So let me see here. 3 Feet High and Rising was definitely the first De La Soul album that I remember hearing. That came out in 89, because I remember, don't mind the phone in the background, people. Which songs do I remember the most? Free is the Magic Number. I remember that. That was a big deal for me. I remember that song very, very well, very vividly from my childhood. I Know as well. I really liked that song, I Know. I really liked I Know. And all the weird skits on 3 Feet High and Rising, the little weird interludes. I'd never heard anything like that before. So I found it very, very interesting. But I Know, Free is the Magic Number, Buddy as well. I remember the video for Buddy. I remember seeing that. This was called the Daisy Age in hip hop music, because there was a lot of like hip hop hippies. That's how De La Soul and the Native Tongues, De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, the Jungle Brothers, etc. That's how they were referred to, as hip hop hippies. So, but I remember 3 Feet High and Rising very vividly, and I did like that album. So that's probably one of the first albums I was a fan of, and that came out in 89. So around 89, 1990, I would have been listening to that. I didn't have a copy of it myself. I think it was probably like a brother's friend who had a copy of it, and then maybe my brother copied it onto his own cassette. You know how it used to be back in the days, if you remember about cassettes. So I didn't have a copy for myself, but I always thought that was a cool album. There was also loads of my brother's friends, this is my older brother, who were fans of Public Enemy, and I remember let's have a look at the discography. It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back. I'm sure that was the first album I started listening to. That came out in 88. All right, so it's all around the same time, between 88 to 1990. There was Public Enemy and there was De La Soul. Those were the two first hip hop artists groups that I really latched onto and started listening to their music properly, albeit, you know, whenever I could, whenever I got the opportunity to listen to somebody else's tape. The first time I actually got hold of my own hip hop tape was not till a few years later. And that was when, actually, do I have it up here? Yeah. The first hip hop tape I got hold of was it must have been in 93. Yeah. So up until 93, I was listening to hip hop music in my brother's bedroom when he borrowed tapes off his friends. But in 93, I managed to get hold of Naughty by Nature. I can't remember how I managed to get hold of it, but I managed to get hold of this Naughty by Nature album, 1993. And one of the first songs I remember liking from it was this song here, track 9, Cruddy Click. Yeah. And I just liked the rawness of the song, how dark it sounded, and I was intrigued. And I played that song, Cruddy Click, over and over and over and over again. There was always also Hip Hop Hooray, which was a big anthem and a very, very, big deal at the time. But Cruddy Click was really my tune. I liked it more than Hip Hop Hooray. I loved Cruddy Click. Yeah. And after that, it was shortly after that, it was literally a month or so after that, there was the one hip hop album which completely turned me into a massive hip hop head and started an obsession that I had with hip hop music from 93 all the way throughout the 90s. And that album was called Into the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. This album made a massive impact on my life. Released November 9th, 1993. A huge deal for me. When I heard 36 Chambers, I was fucking blown away. Blown away. It was so dark. It was so gritty. And remember, at this time, in 93, we moved to the UK in about 87, 88. All right. So around the time that I started listening to hip hop was around the time properly is around the time we arrived in the UK as a family. Yeah. Made friends at school and stuff like that. Started listening to more hip hop. Back home, there wasn't that much hip hop. But in the UK, particularly when you're living in black communities, that's when you start hearing more hip hop. So by 93, we're in Brixton. And Brixton at the time was a gritty, dangerous, ghetto area in South London. Back then it was a hotbed of crime and, all kinds of nonsense. And it was very dirty looking back then. Very dirty, very gritty. And at the time, there was kind of Dr. Dre, I remember, had come out. Around this time with The Chronic, there was Snoop Dogg. And that was kind of, I remember hearing that music here and there and it was cool. But when I first heard Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, that really spoke to me. This album spoke to me. I love the grittiness. It even though it was New York, there was a lot of parallels between my environment in Brixton and their environment in New York. You know, it was a similar kind of vibe. It was a gritty time. And so this album really, really spoke to me. And I learned the album word for word very quickly. And I rinsed the hell out of this tape. I did not have the original tape. I copied it of someone else. I think my brother borrowed the tape from someone, or maybe he had his own copy, and then I made a copy of my own. And I listened to this shit in my Walkman, you know, from sun up to sundown, rewinding, playing back, so much that the tape starts wearing out. Because you know, with the old cassette tapes, the more you play them, the more static you get on the tape. So the more you play them, the worse the tape ends up sounding. And by the end, boy, the tape probably sounded like absolute shit. But from the very beginning, Bring the Ruckus, you know, I love that tune. Shame on a Nigga, I remember that tune. I mean, shit, I know all these tunes back to front and off by heart. The darkness of the beats, the grittiness, the stuff they were talking about. I hadn't even seen a video up to this point. I only was hearing their voices and I was intrigued. You know, it was just an incredible album to me. And to this day, I still have a fond place in my heart for this particular album, End of the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, an incredible album. And yeah, that really sent me along my way, along this journey as a hip hop fan. And after 36 Chambers, I was pretty much obsessed with the Wu-Tang. So when they were bringing out the solo albums, I got the solo albums, you know, or I acquired them somehow. Even if I weren't buying them on tape, I was acquiring them by taping them off other people and stuff like that. In fact, where's the Wu-Tang Clan discography? I guess there's only, Wu-Tang only had 2 albums in the 90s. Because they don't include the solo albums. Because I'm talking about the solo albums here. Yeah, they're the solo albums. But in terms of the solo albums, I could probably name them off the top of my head anyway. 36 Chambers came out in 93. Then the first album to drop after that was Method Man, which I think came out in 94. And then after Method Man, Tikal, his album was called. Yeah, Method Man Tikal came out, and that album was cool. It was quite dark. There was a few cool tunes on there, but I wasn't a massive fan of Tikal when it came out. I thought it was cool. I liked Meth vs. Chef. I liked that song. I liked Bring the Pain and a couple other tunes on there. But I wasn't a massive fan of Tikal when it came out. It was cool. And I guess, you know, You're All I Need as well with Mary J. Blige was cool. So it was a cool album, but it didn't live up to the heights of 36 Chambers, you know. So I was really looking for something to replace that. Then ODB's album came out, which was Return to the 36 Chambers, yeah? Return to the 36 Chambers. That shit came out in whenever it was. That's the famous cover. I actually had a t-shirt with this on. Yeah, Wu-Tang started making their own clothing, which was called Wu Wear. Their clothing line was called Wu Wear, but I had some fake Wu Wear, right? But this fake Wu Wear was still good, and it had the ODB album cover on the front. I remember having that fake Wu Wear t-shirt with the ODB album cover. I was wearing it everywhere. So yeah, there was that album. When did that come out? Okay, that came out in 95, not 94. Oh, no, I think the Method Man one came out in 94. ODB came out in 95. In fact, I think there was 3 albums that the Wu-Tang released in 95. They released Method Man in 94, and then Method Man Tikal 94. Then in 95, they released the ODB album, Return to the 36 Chambers, Raekwon, Only Built for Cuban Links, and The Genius, Liquid Swords. those three albums I loved, particularly Liquid Swords and Cuban Links. Now, I owned Cuban Links. Cuban Links was also known as the purple tape. Only built for Cuban Links. Yeah, I was known as the purple tape because the actual cassette, let me see if I can find it. An image. The actual cassette was purple. I owned this actual purple tape. I had it. Yeah. And I guess they used whatever method they could back then to try and stand out. I never actually realized the vinyl was purple too. Oh shit. Never knew the vinyl was purple, but I knew the tape was purple because I owned it. But that was an incredible album. Cuban Links. That was like a story. It was like a movie. It was the most cinematic album I'd ever heard. You know, from the skits to the beats, it just sounded mad cinematic. It was like listening to a mafia flick, you know, just with black people. It was an incredible album, Cuban Links, which came out in 95. I loved that album, and I also loved Liquid Swords, because Liquid Swords to me was the closest thing that I had got, you know, the closest thing they had done to 36 Chambers was Liquid Swords. Yeah. Liquid Swords 36 Chambers came out in 93. Then we had to wait till 95 until they brought something out which had the same kind of vibe as 36 Chambers. Yeah. Liquid Swords was a wicked album. I loved the imagery. I loved the, I actually owned Liquid Swords on CD. I think that might be one of the first ever CDs I bought when I bought Liquid Swords. And them shits weren't cheap back then, especially not when you're a, you know, teenage kid. It ain't cheap. But I do remember buying Liquid Swords on CD. The imagery just intrigued me. And I was a big fan of GZA as a rapper, you know. I remember listening to 36 Chambers and some of the songs I liked. I mean, I liked all the songs on 36 Chambers, but I liked Protect Your Neck and I liked Clan in the Front. And those were two songs which GZA really stood out on, the genius. So I was definitely a big fan of those songs. So I was eagerly anticipating his album. And when his album came out, Liquid Swords, man, I was bang on it. And it gave me exactly what I wanted. I wanted that dark sound that they had on 36 Chambers. You know, that really, really dark sound. Because there was dark, you know, Return to the 36 Chambers, ODB's album, that was dark, but it was also mad weird. And it was cool, I guess, from a novelty point of view. It was cool. I like Brooklyn Zoo and Shimmy Shimmy Ya and stuff like that. But it was just a mad weird album, and I do like weird stuff, and I did listen to Return to the 36 Chambers, but it didn't have the structure to it that 36 Chambers had, you know? And that's what I was really going for. I wanted the structure and the grittiness of 36 Chambers, and that's what Liquid Swords brought about. So I was obsessed with Liquid Swords, and I was obsessed with Only Built for Cuban Links. I loved those albums. Only Built for Cuban Links, see, at that point, by 95, I was starting to get involved in street stuff, you know, as a teenager. I was starting to get involved in street stuff, so Cuban Links really appealed to me because of that. A lot of people were playing Cuban Links just in the street, cars going by, and you hear, you know, certain tracks from Cuban Links. They were playing a lot of other hip hop as well. But yeah, so that was definitely a big moment for me when Cuban Links came out, Liquid Swords. In fact, let me just go back to Cuban Links and talk about some of them tracks. Only Built for Cuban Links. Let's talk about some of these tracks. I love that the album covers were so unique, you know, that the Wu-Tang used to come out with. Nobody was doing album covers like this. You looked at their album covers and you were like, what the hell's going on in this album cover? Why are they wearing these weird robes? Like, he's got smoke coming off him because he's that hot as an artist, and it's got the Wu-Tang logo, and, you know, even the font that they were using was just all so unique. It was just so different. Everything about Wu-Tang was different to all the other artists who were around at the time. The beats were different. The rhyme style was totally different. The album covers were different. Just everything was different about them. Nobody was rhyming like the Wu-Tang. Nobody was doing it like they were doing it. And it was just so gritty and it was cerebral. You know, a lot of the time when you would listen to someone like Genius, for example, you'd have to really think about what the hell this guy was saying, because it was some very cerebral stuff. It wasn't ABC, 1, 2, 3 nursery rhymes. Like, he was saying some deep stuff in Liquid Swords. And even Raekwon and Ghostface was saying a lot of difficult to decipher stuff on Cuban Links because of the fact that they were using so much street slang, Staten Island street slang from New York, street slang, a lot of it which they themselves came up with. So yeah, it took you a minute to figure out what the hell they were talking about sometimes, But yeah, there were so many songs on the Cuban Links album that I liked, because I was starting to get involved in the streets myself at this age. By 95, what was the track listing? Yeah, the whole thing was like a movie. It was mad cinematic. Criminology was one of my favorites. Knowledge God was one of my favorites. Knucklehead, I loved that. Incarcerated Scarfaces was a big tune. But I would say two of my favorites are definitely Knowledge God and Criminology, just because of the style of the beat. They were so cinematic. They had like mafia samples and stuff like that in it. They were just mad cinematic, and it really captured my imagination. And also, it captured the vibe of the world I myself was starting to get into, Rainy Days was another one of my favorites. It rains a lot in the UK. Rainy Days is one of my favorites. Can It Be Also Simple remix was one of my favorites. Glaciers of Ice I liked. Wu Gambino's. I was a big lover of Wu Gambino's. Ice Cream, definitely. You know what I mean? I remember Ice Cream. I remember cars coming past playing Ice Cream, going past certain people's houses. They were, bumping Ice Cream. And obviously I was into girls at them times, So, as a teenager, that's when your hormones are up and you're really like chasing girls down and all that kind of business. That's when it happens, and that's when it starts when you're a teenager. Actually, no, it starts before then. I was chasing girls down from when I was a really young kid, but I didn't know what I was doing. I wasn't really aware of what I was doing. It's not until I was a teenager that I was really aware, and then it was far more of a sexual thing by that age. But anyway, that's a whole different podcast. So let's move on from Only Built for Cuban Links and Liquid Swords. In 95, another album came out, which I didn't actually listen to in 95 when it first dropped. But it later went on to become one of my favorite albums of all time. And that is an album called The Infamous by Mobb Deep. I didn't listen to this album, I think, until at least 96. The first time I really started paying attention to Mobb Deep, truth be told, was when Hell on Earth came out. When I heard the Hell on Earth album, see, they were having their beef with Tupac and all this kind of stuff around the time Hell on Earth came out, and that's what brought so much attention to Hell on Earth. So when Mobb Deep, because remember at this time, Mobb Deep ain't on the television. Most of the time anyway. They might have been on some late night TV program somewhere in the UK, but I never saw no Mobb Deep on the television. I was too young to go to nightclubs at this time, and even the nightclubs, they weren't really playing Mobb Deep anyway, as far as I'm aware, in the UK, in South London. So the only way for you to know about a particular hip-hop artist at this time was through somebody else, someone telling you about them, or through hip-hop magazines. And by 95, I wasn't buying hip-hop magazines yet. I don't think anyway. I don't think I was buying hip-hop magazines in 95. Was I? Maybe I was. Was I buying? It might have been around that time, actually. It might have been around 94, 95 I started buying hip-hop magazines. But either way, I don't remember paying attention to Mobb Deep until Hell on Earth came out. When Hell on Earth came out, they were going back and forth. They were having a beef with Tupac. One of the first Mobb Deep songs I remember hearing and actually seeing a video to was the title song, Hell on Earth. And I just love the dark image. See, again, you notice a pattern with me. I like the darkness, the dark imagery, the gritty rhymes, the gritty beats, and all that kind of business. So when this came out, I started paying attention to Mobb Deep. And that's when I went back afterwards and, copped their first album. Well, it was actually their second album, The Infamous. And I liked The Infamous way more than Hell on Earth. I liked Hell on Earth. I liked it. I liked a lot of the gritty songs on there and all that kind of business. But I like The Infamous even more than Hell on Earth, So let's look at their discography. Juvenile Hell. To this day, I still haven't listened to Juvenile Hell. I've heard a couple tracks off it, but I've never listened to the whole thing. The Infamous, I love that. You can look at some of the tracks on The Infamous. All of it just spoke to me. Because I'm getting involved right now in, street situations and all kinds of things I shouldn't be involved in. And there's a lot of crazy stuff going on at the time. People getting locked up. People close to me getting locked up. People getting shot and stabbed and all kind of funny things are going on. So this album really, really spoke to me. From the start of your ending. It was just so gritty and grimy. You see, a lot of other artists who talked about the streets, they talked about it from the perspective of being a boss, driving in a big car and having already made it. Whereas Mobb Deep was speaking from the perspective of being frontline soldiers who hadn't made it. Guys who were in the midst of the action on the front line, doing the actual drug deals and sticking people up in the streets day to day. Do you understand? And so it spoke to the average little frontline soldier, the guy who hasn't made it, the guy who ain't made it out of the hood, the guy who ain't become rich, the guy who's still struggling. You understand? And that's why it spoke to me so much. I always had a fascination for dark and gritty things anyway, but the fact that they were really speaking on the day-to-day struggle in the street life appealed to me massively. So I was a huge fan of this album when I heard it. And again, it must have been in 96 by the time I heard this album. From, Survival of the Fittest, the video for Survival of the Fittest was just amazing. Start of Your Ending, An Eye for an Eye. I used to love that tune. That tune was just mad gritty, One of my least favorite songs on the album was Give Up the Goods, because the beat wasn't gritty enough for me. The beat kind of almost didn't fit in on this album, That beat, I think was it co-produced? Yeah, The Abstract, that's Q-Tip. So he produced that. So it was cool. I didn't hate the song or anything, but it didn't really appeal to me that much. And also Drink Away the Pain, that was cool. Also produced by The Abstract and co-produced by Mobb Deep, The Abstract being Q-Tip of Tribe Called Quest. I forgot to talk about Tribe Called Quest actually. Tribe Called Quest are another group I was listening to in the early 90s prior to hearing 36 Chambers. I remember Can You Kick It? Tribe Called Quest, that was a big, big moment for me in hip hop. Can You Kick It? I love that tune. I remember listening over and over again with my brother and his friends to Can You Kick, Can I Kick It? Watching the video on the TV and all that kind of business. But anyway, back to Mobb Deep. Massive fan of this album. Massive fan. Just spoke to me. I was rinsing it over and over and over and over and over again, and continued to rinse this album even after leaving school, getting more involved in silly street activity that I shouldn't have been involved in. So I was a big fan of most of the songs on here. Obviously Shook Ones is a huge deal on this particular album, Shook Ones Part 2, which is near the end. Party Over, I also love Party Over. And when I was rapping, because around this time in high school I started rapping. Yeah, that's another thing I ain't even touched on. I started rapping. And when you first start rapping, you try and rap like your favorite rapper, which is what I was doing. I was rapping in an American accent, trying to rap like my favorite rappers, whether it be, Genius or RZA or Raekwon or whoever, or even Mobb Deep. I was trying to rap like them. At this point, I wasn't recording. Well, no, actually, no. My brother was a DJ, so I did try and record a few little, shitty demo tapes over instrumentals. around this time, which I would play to my friends, but that's not like recording proper music, that you actually put out there and other people can listen to. So I did have a couple little shitty demo tapes that I played to my friends, rapping over certain beats, because I started buying vinyl. My brother had a couple vinyl hip hop tracks. My brother wasn't actually a hip hop DJ. Yeah, I won't get into what my brother was DJing, but he wasn't a hip hop DJ. So he didn't have that many hip hop tunes with instrumentals for me to rap over, But I was messing around and I ended up getting my own vinyl later on and, doing some demo tapes and stuff like that for friends. But anyway, I was rapping at first, trying to do my thing, sounded like somebody else before I developed my own style later on. But yeah, this album definitely spoke to me. Hell on Earth definitely spoke to me. In fact, Hell on Earth, let me go to Hell on Earth. Where we at? Mobb Deep. I'm going back and forth all over here, people. All over the place here. One of the tunes I liked the most on Hell on Earth was the one that sampled Scarface, the Scarface tune. That to me is still crazy, man. I love that tune. Godfather Part 3. I love that beat. And I loved a lot of the beats on here, actually. I did like them. I just feel like the rapping wasn't as strong, the hooks weren't as strong, and the overall vibe of the album wasn't as strong as The Infamous was. But there was some very nice beats, and that in particular, Godfather Part 3, to this day, I'm in love with that beat. Godfather Part 3. I know it's a simple sample of the Scarface Tony's theme, but it just works so well. It's just such a hard beat. It's so dark. It's gritty. I love the bass line. I just love that tune. And going back to their discography, one thing I forgot to mention in Hell on Earth. Oh no, we're already there. My bad. No, The Infamous. Because I was talking about when I started rapping. That there, to this day, Party Over, is a beat that I fucking love. I love the Party Over beat, and I've always wanted to rap over that beat. But you cannot find the instrumental for Party Over any fucking where. I've been unable to locate that shit anywhere. If any of you have ever heard of Party Over, the instrumental, and I don't mean the looped version, I mean the actual instrumental, because some people take part of the instrumental, or sorry, some people listen to the tune and they sample part of the tune and just loop it to turn it into an instrumental. That's not what I'm talking about. I want the actual original instrumental. Can't get hold of it anywhere. Always wanted to get hold of it because I fucking love that beat for Party Over. It's mad gritty and it sums up the whole vibe of the album. I remember somebody talking about this album. I don't know if it was Mobb Deep when they were being interviewed somewhere on some radio show or whatever. And the person asking the questions basically said to them that the Infamous album had a sinking feeling. That's the feeling that you got listening to the Infamous, like you're just sinking into darkness. You're sinking into the depths of the underworld in the streets. Like your whole life is sinking and you just got yourself into a situation you can't get out of. You caught a body or you done some mad crime and you're looking at 100 years in prison or something. That is the feeling of this album. And I know that's very dark and I'm in a much different place now than I was when I was listening to this, even though I still love this album, I guess from nostalgic reasons. Even though I'm in a very different place, I loved the sinking feeling. It just really spoke to me. And the lifestyle I was living at the time and the environment I was in at the time, that sinking feeling that the Infamous gives you. And Party Over perfectly sums up that sinking feeling. Just listen to the beat, how stark and just dark that beat is for Party Over. It's just, I was obsessed with the beat in that song. I still am. But going back to Hell on Earth, I liked a lot of the tunes. And in terms of the beats, I loved Godfather Part 3 beat. I loved Animal Instinct beat. But a really, really slept on beat that I fucking to this day I'm absolutely obsessed with is Can't Get Enough of It. Oh my days, that beat is hard. Can't get enough of it is just a banging beat. And Illa G, I'm not really a fan of him as a rapper, but his verse was sick because his flow was sick on that track. Can't get enough of it. Love that. Love that. Yeah. All right, so this was 95, and we really are in the golden age of hip hop at this point, 95. A lot of rappers were making gritty sounding music. Um, Nas came out in 95 as well with his first album. A bunch of people came out in 95. Biggie came out with his first album. See, I wasn't really into Biggie back then. It wasn't until after Biggie's death that I really went back and started listening to his music, and I was like, you know what, he's actually cool. But there was a lot of gritty guys. I was more into the gritty artists by this point because, I'm getting into the streets myself at this time, and, the street guys are more speaking to me. Nas was cool with Illmatic, but it wasn't gritty enough for me. It wasn't angry enough for me because in 95, 95, I was an angry teenager. I was involved in the streets, and Mobb Deep was speaking to me. Even Wu-Tang, the darker artists, they were speaking to me too, because even though I was involved in the street, I still had a conscious aspect to my personality. And so Wu-Tang catered for both aspects. They catered for the dark, streets, gritty side, and also for the conscious side. So, but, in a street way. Nas was cool, but wasn't aggressive enough for me. That's basically the way that I'll put it. So, yeah. 1995, a lot of good albums came out in that year. 96, who came out in 96? Can't remember who came out in 96. 97. But throughout the 90s, let me just talk without trying to go from year to year. Some of my favorite artists from the 90s. God, I'm getting uncomfortable here, man. This laptop is mad heavy. I got like a 17-inch gaming laptop and the thing weighs a ton. Costs like $1,500 for this shit. Weighs a flipping ton. Yeah, some of my favorite artists from the 90s would be Dead Prez, Mobb Deep, Wu-Tang, Big L. In fact, Big L I think first came out in 95. Digging in the Crates, I like them. Fat Joe. Fat Joe came out with his first album, which was... What was his first album called? Fat Joe the Gangster. No. Was it Represent? I can't remember what Fat Joe's first album was. Represent. Was he Represent or Fat Joe the Gangster? Let's have a look at his discography. The one where he's on the front. Let me have a look at Fat Joe. I did like Fat Joe because he was aggressive. I liked his delivery. Discography. Represent. Okay. Yeah, Represent was the first one. He never even had an album called Fat Joe the Gangster. Why am I thinking he had an album called Fat Joe the Gangster? God knows why. Oh, because it said on the front. That's why. Yeah, it said Fat Joe the Gangster on the front, but the album was just called Represent. Okay, that's why. That's where the confusion has come in. I wasn't really a fan actually of this album. I thought it was cool. The Fat Gangster and stuff like that. I more liked Jealous One's Envy, which came out in 95 as well. I was a big fan of this album. Jealous One's Envy, 95 was such a huge year, man. So many incredible albums came out in 95. Huge year for hip hop. So Fat Joe was there. Mobb Deep, Wu-Tang. God, who else, man? Big L came out with Lifestyles in the Poor and Dangerous, I think, around 95. In fact, let me just check Big L's discography. Big L. Let's have a look. Discography. Yeah, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous came out in 95. So many major artists in hip hop history released classic albums in 1995. I'm sure Nas definitely was 95, wasn't it? when he came out with Illmatic. 95 must have been like the greatest year in hip hop history then. I know it was an amazing era because back then it's like every other week somebody was releasing some incredible album. No, it came out in 94 actually. Nas's album came out in 94, not 95. But I do remember around this time, the mid 90s, even towards the late 90s, every other week somebody was telling me about, oh my God, you have to hear this new album. Oh my God, you have to hear this. Oh my God. It was just overwhelming how many amazing new albums were coming out all the time. And back then, the artists were so different from each other. You know, so many of the artists were so different. The beats between different artists were so different. The beats that Biggie was rhyming on were totally different to the beats that Wu-Tang were rhyming on. You know? And they were different to the Mobb Deep style beats. And they were different to Dr. Dre beats. There was just so many different beat styles which were vastly different from each other. Redman and his crew, you know, with EPMD and the Def Squad, their beats were totally different. Their whole sound was totally different. De La Soul, their sound was totally different. And this is what was going on in the 90s. People with vastly different rhyming styles, vastly different production styles. But most of them were from the same city, New York. It was incredible. It was just such a creative time for hip hop. It was definitely the golden era. So I wasn't really big into West Coast at the time. But one of the artists I did like on the West Coast was Ice Cube. And Ice Cube came out with an album. I remember NWA actually, but I was never really massively into NWA when they were around. I remember Fuck the Police and 100 Miles and Running, which I remember as cool songs. Kind of novelty songs really, like Fuck the Police. It was like a novelty song. But the first West Coast artist who really spoke to me, that I really paid attention to, was Ice Cube when he came out with America's Most Wanted. And it was produced by the Bomb Squad, who were the people that produced most, if not all, of Public Enemy's early stuff. Yeah. Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted. And you can see as an angry young teenager who actually came out in 1990. Wow, earlier than I thought. But I was listening to this, America's Most Wanted, throughout the early 90s. You know, in fact, the first time I probably listened to this was around the same time that I heard Enter the Wu-Tang. So I want to say it was around 93. So I probably listened to it a good 3 years after it came out. Yeah. But I was a massive fan of this. I forgot to talk about this, America's Most Wanted. I was a massive fan of this album. You know, all the songs in there. The production style was angry and fierce, and the storytelling I liked. Ice Cube's voice. You know, it all just appealed to me. I definitely like this album. Let me go to the track list and talk about some of these. The nigga you love to hate. Yeah, I'm the nigga you love to hate. I remember that. Wicked, America's Most Wanted, love that. Can't Fade Me, I remember that. Once Upon a Time in the Projects, yo, I damn near had to wreck a hoe. I remember that. Used to love that. Tales from the Dark Side, yup. I'm only out for one thing. Yeah, that's what he's talking about, girls. Yeah. I remember in that one is like, she had more ass than a donkey. Yeah. Get off my dick and tell your bitch to come here. Can you imagine? This guy's naming tracks. Get off my dick and tell your bitch to come here. The drive-by rolling with the lynch mob. Who's the Mac? I was a big, and the bomb at the end. Yeah. I was a big fan of this album, man. America's Most Wanted. Angry. And it was kind of like a good mix of East Coast grittiness with a little bit of West Coast smoothness mixed in. Was it completely produced by the Bomb Squad? No. It was some tracks were co-produced. Okay. Pretty much was produced by the Bomb Squad, but it was co-produced a little bit by a couple other people here and there. But yeah, this was a time when producers would produce whole albums back then. It was very common for producers to do the whole album, one producer to do the whole damn thing. These days, it's not as common for one producer to produce a whole album as it was then. I know it still does happen, but it's not as common as it was then. And that helped certain artists carve out a unique sound for themselves because they were using one producer. Like, for example, with Gang Starr, it was just Primo. DJ Premier, he was producing all of Gang Starr's music. So they had a unique sound. You know, and with De La Soul, in the early days, it was all produced by Prince Paul. So they had a unique sound that nobody else had. And back then, there was really an emphasis by so many artists to want to sound unique. Everybody wanted to sound different. Everybody wanted to sound unique. And because they wanted to sound unique, they did sound unique. There were some people who were copying and trying to sound like someone else. But for the most part, everyone was trying to sound different and come up with new ways of sounding different. I know I've missed a load of artists at the moment. I've missed Slick Rick and a bunch of other people, but I'll be here talking for 3-4 hours if I cover every single artist, you know. So I'm just trying to stick to the main artists which had the biggest impact on me. So Ice Cube was definitely one of them with this particular album. And I know there was other albums like Predator and Death Certificate, but this was my favorite Ice Cube album, America's Most Wanted. Still today, by far my favorite Ice Cube album. So yeah, going into 95, 96, I was still listening to Wu-Tang very much. Iron Man, I think, came out in 96, didn't it? Ghostface Killer Iron Man, I'm sure that came out in 96. And that was Ghostface's first album. And I liked Ghostface from very early on in the Wu-Tang because of his aggression. And he had so much emotion in his delivery. I was always intrigued by Ghostface. He was just such a vivid MC. Yeah, Iron Man did come out in 96. So I was a huge fan of this album. But one thing I will say is that this album was the first time where you heard certain Wu-Tang beats that maybe weren't really up to scratch. Yeah. I heard certain beats on this album, and because I was such a massive Wu-Tang fan, I let it slide. But in the back of my head, I was thinking, this beat is not great, you know. Some of the beats were amazing. Iron Maiden, incredible beat. You know, Wildflower's cool. Faster Blade is good. 260. Assassination Day. I remember hearing that beat and I was like, not sure about that beat. Poisonous Darts was cool. Winter Wars. A lot of people like that beat, and I guess it's cool. But I'm not going to put Winter Wars up there with one of my favorite Wu-Tang beats. You know, I wasn't a massive fan of the Winter Wars beat either. Box in Hand, I love that beat. I love that beat. Yeah. I do like that beat. It's dark and it's just got a unique type of sound to it, Box in Hand. You know, unique kind of sound. Fish. Love that beat too. It's got a real Caribbean vibe to it. Love it. Kamei. Daytona 500. I love that beat. These are such unique beats. Nobody was making beats like this. Are you nuts? Nobody was making beats like this. Show me somebody who was making beats that sounded like Iron Maiden. Or Box in Hand or Fish. Nobody back then was making beats that sound like that. Or Daytona 500. Motherless Child, I love that tune. Black Jesus. No one's making no beats like Black Jesus today. Have you heard Black Jesus? Oh man, that beat was incredible. After the Smoke is Clear, another great track. All That I Got Is You, classic. The Soul Controller with the movie samples from The Usual Suspects. The Soul Controller had, you know, the Kevin Spacey samples from that. I did actually love this album. I loved it. I loved the whole vibe, you know. And this was kind of seen as only built for Cuban Links Part 2. That's how it was seen at the time. And I think that's how it was intended to be. Was intended to be only built for Cuban Links Part 2. It's got Raekwon on there with Capadonna. Yeah, but it never was officially Cuban Link Part 2, but unofficially that's what it was supposed to be. Did like that album. So what about after that? In 96, 97, who came out in 97? Wu-Tang dropped their second album, I think, in 97. And I was disappointed by their second album, Wu-Tang Forever. I was disappointed. It came out a double CD, and I remember listening to the album and I was like, there was certain tunes on there that I liked, like For Heaven's Sake, Projects, what else did I like? Bells of War. But other than that, I was really disappointed. I'm not going to lie. I was a massive Wu-Tang fan. In fact, after Wu-Tang Forever, I kind of drifted away from the Wu-Tang because I was obsessed with Wu-Tang from 93 through to 97. Completely obsessed. But after they dropped Wu-Tang Forever, I started drifting away from them. I did like Ghostface's second album, Supreme Clientele, but still, it was never the same for me. Wu-Tang were never the same for me. Their energy and their message and all that kind of stuff was never the same from Wu-Tang Forever onwards. It just weren't the same anymore. But I'm sure Wu-Tang Forever came out in 97. So this was kind of the end of my love affair with the Wu-Tang, was when this album dropped. And everything about this album was just, you know, below par. Even the album cover. You know? You look at the album cover for the other Wu-Tang albums and they're all interesting and they all look esoteric and just intriguing. Whereas Wu-Tang Forever just looks so bland. You know? It's like Wu-Tang had turned corporate. And this was also the first album. I'm not sure about Liquid Swords actually. Other than Liquid Swords, I believe this was the first Wu-Tang album which had very few samples on it. There are a few samples here, but it wasn't mad sample heavy. You see? Several songs here with no samples. Here. And RZA, who produced the whole thing, he's not really a musician, he's a sampler. So when he had to turn musician and start playing keys and making up melodies, it weren't great, you know, especially in the early days. I think he improved on his Bobby Digital albums and whatnot, but yeah, the early days of him trying to make his own melodies and use synths, it wasn't particularly great. You know, I know he did use synths on Liquid Swords, but I don't know, somehow it worked on there. Playing his own melodies and stuff like that on Wu-Tang Forever, nah. It just didn't quite work. Triumph was a great beat, but that was a sample. Impossible was a good song. I like that. Deadly Melody, The City, nah. Impossible had an incredible verse from Ghostface on Impossible. Projects was cool. Bells of War I've already talked about. The MGM was cool, I guess. Dog shit. I was ODB. And that was a cool album, I guess. A cool song, I guess. Duck Season, Hell's Wind Staff, Heaters, nothing special. Black Shampoo was garbage. Second Coming, The Closing, Sun Shower, the Project. See, CD2 particularly was weak, man. Triumph was cool. You know, Little Ghetto Boys, nothing great. The first CD, because it was double CD. Reunited, I guess, was cool. For Heaven's Sake was cool. Cash Still Rules, I wasn't impressed with. Visions, I wasn't impressed with. As High as Wu-Tang Get, I wasn't particularly impressed with. I guess the bass line was kind of cool, but that's about it. Severe Punishment, I wasn't impressed with. Older Gods was cool, I guess. You know, it had kind of an interesting beat. Um, Maria. Oh, I'm trying to remember that song actually. Maria. How did Maria sound? I'm not sure how Maria was. Because Dog Shit was an ODB song on this album, but Maria, I'm not sure I can remember Maria. A Better Tomorrow was alright, you know. That's where they're talking about you can't fuck your life away, drink your life away, smoke your life away because your seeds turn out the same way. That was cool. It's yours was cool. So yeah, basically, Wu-Tang Forever was a disappointment for me, and I lost faith in them when this came out, and I stopped really following them that closely because in 1998, 97, 98, there was some new artists who came out. And at this time, I was fully writing. Yeah, by 97, 98, I was fully writing and I was trying to be a rapper. And I was going out there, I was making more tapes and I was doing stuff. People were hearing me, you know, friends and stuff like that, friends of friends. Um, and I'd got up to a level as a rapper where I thought, you know what, I might actually be able to do something in this game as a rapper. Yeah, because I built my skills up to a certain level. And then I heard this tune. Because there was a group I used to like called the Beatnuts, right? The Beatnuts. And they were a very underground New York hip hop group from Corona, Queens. Street Level was a big deal for them, which I never actually heard until long after it came out. My first introduction to the Beatnuts was this album, Stone Crazy, because I'd heard the single from this album called Off the Books, right? Which had an incredible beat and it had an incredible verse by a new artist called Big Pun. And his flow was crazy on Off the Books. So when I heard his flow, I was like, okay, that's an impressive flow. And in my head, I'm trying to keep up with people like this. I'm thinking, okay, maybe he just did that flow in one song. He can't keep that up for a whole album. But still, I bought Stone Crazy off the strength of Off the Books. You know, so I listened to Stone Crazy and I started listening to more Beatnuts and I bought some vinyls of theirs and started rapping over some Beatnuts vinyls and all that kind of business. But when Big Pun dropped his album in 98, I wanted to quit rap. I was like, you know what? If this is the level that hip hop is at now, if this is how good rappers are, I need to fucking quit now because there's no way I'll ever be able to keep up with someone this good. Like Big Pun literally made me want to quit rap when I heard his album. I was like, fuck it. Like, let me just quit. But around this same time, 96, 97, or maybe 97, 98, is when Raucous Records first started taking off. Right? Raucous Records. Let's have a look exactly what year. Okay, they started in 95, but yeah, their first Dystopia 1, I've never even heard that. Attempted Mustache, never heard of that. In 97, they came out with Company Flow, Fun Crusher Plus. Now, I bought this off the strength of a single, right? I bought a Company Flow single, which had, it was Blind, right? The single was called Blind. And on the other side, it had the 8 Steps to Perfection remix. And it also had, what was it? Blind, 8 Steps to Perfection, and what else was on there? Tragedy of War in 3 parts. Yeah. That was the, you know, and Company Flow were a very underground, abstract, gritty, b-boy type group. You know, it's very difficult to describe what Company Flow were like as a group in terms of what style of music they produced. It was just very, very gritty, very dark, but it wasn't really based around streets. They were extremely deep in terms of metaphors, very abstract. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before when I heard, Company Flow when they came out with Fun Crusher Plus. Even look at the artwork for the album was just bizarre, like aliens on the front and shit. It was just one of the strangest things I'd ever heard. But I was always intrigued with new stuff, new types of sound, especially if it's gritty, and Company Flow definitely was gritty. So when Fun Crusher Plus came out in 97, I was definitely listening to that, and I was listening to the early Raucous stuff because Raucous Records were coming out with Sound Bombing. I remember hearing Sound Bombing as well. I had the first Sound Bombing, which came out in 97, and that was DJ'd and hosted by DJ Evil D. And DJ Evil D, he kind of had a voice like Chris Rock, and some people found it annoying. Me personally, I liked it because I liked Chris Rock at the time. So I was a massive fan of Company Flow Fun Crusher Plus, massive fan of Sound Bombing, and Sound Bombing introduced me to artists like Mos Def and Talib Kweli. It introduced me to R.A. the Rugged Man. It introduced me to Shabam Sadiq. It introduced me to who else now? Aguilar. Who else was there? El Fudge. That was a great album, actually, or mixtape. Sound Bombing was a mixtape. It wasn't even an album. Because I was buying mixtapes at this point. I used to go to Dark and Cold, which is a famous clothing and mixtape store in Soho in London. So I was going to Dark and Cold at this point. And I was also going to, what was the other record shop called in Soho? Hip hop record shop. There was a couple other ones. Mr. Bongos. I was going to Mr. Bongos, I was going to Dark and Cold, and there was yet another one that I would go to, which was near Dark and Cold. I can't remember the fucking name of it. I can't remember the name of it. Mr. Bongos, Dark and Cold, and there was another, was it Street something? Street? I can't remember, but I used to go there to buy mixtapes. And around this time, I started getting into the underground scene, the Raucous Records, independent underground scene, with Mos Def and Talib Kweli and, all these Raucous artists that were coming through. And even Eminem, actually. Eminem wasn't on Raucous, but Eminem was on some mixtapes that I was buying. I bought a mixtape by a guy called DJ Greenpeace. Yeah, he's a British hip-hop DJ. I don't know if he's still DJing now, but he was called DJ Greenpeace. And on his mixtape, which I must have bought around 98, 99, I don't know, around them times, there was two Eminem songs on there. One of them was Just the Two of Us with the original beat. Yeah. And the other one was Brain Damage. And I was blown the fuck away. I was completely blown away when I heard Just the Two of Us and Brain Damage. I was like, what? How the fuck can somebody be so good at storytelling? Blown the fuck away when I heard them two songs. Yeah. So this is towards the late 90s, Eminem's coming out. Obviously during this whole time you had Tupac. I was never really big into Tupac. I was never really big into Biggie. DMX was cool. One of my best friends was a big fan of DMX, so I did listen to DMX here and there. But, wasn't massively enamored with DMX. It was more the artists I've been talking about here. Big Pun when he came out with his first album, Capital Punishment. And I had the cassette tape of Capital Punishment where Big Pun is grabbing the girl's tits. Yeah? Because you don't really see that cover anymore. The Capital Punishment where he's grabbing the girl's tits. Because there are two versions of the cover. See, there's this version, which is the one you see most of the time. Alright? That's the standard version of Capital Punishment, the album cover. But I had the other one. I had the cassette tape where he's this one. You see? Now this is the vinyl version, but I had the cassette tape where he's grabbing the girl's tits. Yeah, that one. I had that. And the songs on the album, his flows were so advanced. They were so far beyond any rapper I'd ever heard. His flow and his, he wasn't just having a sick flow. It was also putting incredible metaphors and punchlines and similes and all that kind of stuff into the flow. Yeah. Yeah, he blew me away, man. Method Man and Redman, they came out with their album, Blackout. When did that come out, actually? I liked Method Man and Redman, Blackout. That was a wicked album, actually. That was a very fun album. Method Man and Redman, Blackout was like the audio version of a buddy movie. Yeah, you know buddy movies? Listening to Blackout was like a hip-hop buddy movie. But just the audio version. You know what I mean? Yeah, Blackout. And me and my friends, we were driving at this point. We were driving around in our car and whatever. Doing what we did. And we'd be singing the songs, rapping along and singing along to some of these songs at the top of our voices in the car where we're going places and shit, because it did have that kind of body vibe. Particularly Fire in the Hole. We'd be sitting there in the car talking about Fire in the Hole. And also the Rottweiler. Sawing off shotgun, hand on the pump, sipping on the 40, smoking on the blunt. La 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 la. Yeah. The Rottweiler. Serial Killer. It was just such a fun album. And it came out in... When did it come out? 99. Alright. Came out in 99. Busta Rhymes also. I was listening to Busta Rhymes, definitely. I liked Busta Rhymes. I liked a lot of his singles, but I wasn't a big fan of his albums. I like Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See. That must have come out around 97, 98, I'm guessing. And that was an incredible song. The incredible video. I've never seen a video like that. Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See. Shit. I'd never seen nothing like that before. So I did like Busta Rhymes, but more his singles rather than his albums. Jeru the Damager, he's another person I liked. He had tracks like Come Clean. He had tracks like You Can't Stop the Prophet. That came in several parts. What else did he have now? The Bitches. And then part 2 to The Bitches was Me or the Papes, which is on his second album, Wrath of the Math. I actually preferred Wrath of the Math. See, a lot of people preferred Jeru the Damager's first album. Hang on, let me get to him in a sec. When my eyes can see. Yeah. What's the Rhymes video? Let's go to the images anyway. Maybe you'll see the video. Yeah. These weird, like, African voodoo type images from Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See. These were from the video. And that was the first time I'd ever seen a fisheye lens used in a rap video. Was Put Your Hands Where My Eyes Can See. One of the most incredible rap videos I've ever seen. Heavily inspired by Coming to America. And the flow was incredible. Like, the flow was crazy on that track. But yeah, it was more his singles rather than his albums, which I was interested in. Busta Rhymes. Let's just go to Big Pun, Capital Punishment, and we'll get back to talking about whoever else it was. Pun. Capital Punishment. Where are we at? Okay. Talk about some of the tracks here on Capital Punishment. Incredible flows all the way from Beware, here's the thing. On this album, Big Pun kept stepping it up and stepping it up and stepping it up when it comes to the flow and delivery. To the point where you were like, are you fucking kidding me? Yeah, let me just quit rap. Because this guy's... You see, people kept pushing each other in the hip hop game, to the point where everybody was having to up their game when a new artist came out who upped the levels. So when Big Pun came out, I was like, you know what? I can't keep up anymore. Just when I thought I kept up with this rapper or that rapper, and now I feel like I'm on their level. When Big Pun came out, I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me. Because new artists were coming out all the time, new talented artists, new artists who people were saying were the best. When Big Pun came out, it was fucking over. So Beware was crazy. Wasn't a massive fan of Super Lyrical. Still not a player. You know, these are kind of the commercial tunes, which, you know, I guess were cool. Dream Shatterer was a wicked song where Big Pun went in. Oh my gosh. Packing the Mac was hilarious. Back in the Mac in the back of the act. Back in the Mac in the back of the act. You Ain't a Killer was an incredible song. Glamour Life was great. Capital Punishment, the title track was great, where Big Pun said something like, there's no longevity living off negativity, but fuck it, I'd rather sell reefer than do pizza delivery. Deep. I mean, deep. There's no longevity living off negativity, but fuck it, I'd rather sell pizza than... what am I doing? I'm messing it up. There's no longevity living off negativity, but fuck it, I'd rather sell reefer than do pizza delivery. You know what I mean? Crazy. Crazy. So he was going in. Deep cover. Twins. The deep cover, the Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg remake track where he's talking about dead in the middle of little widdly little did we know that we riddled to middle man and didn't do diddly. Crazy. Big Pun just took it there, man, and beyond. So massive fan of Big Pun, man. Huge fan. MOP, I like them obviously, and MOP, their last album that I really paid attention to was, to me, their greatest album, which was Warriors, and that's an album I still listen to this day. I love Warriors, and really that was the end for me of the classic era of hip hop. Warriors came out in 2000, and it still had that 90s vibe and that 90s energy. But after Warriors, hip hop music was never the same for me. It was just never the same. After the year 2000, hip hop was never the same. And there were some artists that I did like, you know, the odd tune here and there. Kanye West's first album came out, College Dropout. I liked it. You know, I like loads of the songs on College Dropout, but it still wasn't really speaking to me. I liked what he was doing, but it wasn't speaking to me, that album. Do you understand? The way that MOP Warriors spoke to me, or the way that Mobb Deep, the Infamous, spoke to me, or the way that Wu-Tang 36 Chambers spoke to me, or the way that Ice Cube, America's Most Wanted, spoke to me. So on and so forth. You know, the way that Company Flow. In fact, Company Flow Fun Crusher Plus didn't even speak to me. I just found it sonically so interesting because it was so dark and weird. I just found it, you know, very interesting. Yeah, Big L. I love Big L. An incredible rapper. You know, here's the thing about Big L. Big L died before he could make a classic album. Now, some people might say Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous is a classic album. I wouldn't go that far. Big L's second album, The Big Picture, was released after he died. So he only completed about 3/4 of it or half of it, The Big Picture. Then he died. So they had to kind of do like a patchwork job after he died, you know, because they had Big L on a track with Tupac and Biggie on the Big L album. In fact, what was that called? The Big L, Tupac and Biggie song. I remember the beat. It had like a very Tupac-esque kind of beat. Typical Tupac type of beat. But it had Big L and Biggie rapping on it. And what was it called? Big L, Biggie, and Tupac. Deadly Combination. Yeah. Deadly Combination. Which was a nice song, you know. And there was some incredible tracks actually on A Big Picture. DITC, I used to listen to DITC as well. DITC was a collective, and in that collective was AG, Showbiz and AG, Andre the Giant, and Showbiz, who was the producer, Andre the Giant, the rapper. Fat Joe was in DITC. Big L was in DITC. Lord Finesse was in DITC, and a bunch of other guys were in it. KRS-One was definitely affiliated with DITC. I'm not sure if he was an official member, but I remember the DITC album, KRS-One was on a couple of tracks. And that DITC album was like really badly mixed and mastered. You know, it was far too much high end on the DITC album when it first came out. There's like loads of high end and loads of low end. It's like they completely cut out all the mid frequencies when they mixed and mastered that DITC album. Who the fuck mixed that? I've got no idea. But yeah, just imagine completely cutting out all the mid frequencies and keeping the bass in the very high end. It just sounded fucking terrible. Most of the tracks anyway, not all of the tracks sounded like that, but most of the tracks were just badly mixed and mastered. I don't know who the fuck mixed and mastered it, but they did a terrible job. Really terrible job. It didn't do the beats on that album justice, you know? But yeah, man, the 90s was the golden era. After that, I started losing my interest in hip-hop music. And there's loads of other artists I haven't talked about. There's loads of other rappers and producers and all kinds of things, but I'd be here all day talking, and I'm sure this video is about an hour long at least at the moment. So, yeah, maybe I'll leave that for another day. But that was just my basic, in a very scattered way, journey through hip-hop from the early days in the mid to late 80s through to the late 90s. And yeah, MOP Warriors was the last great hip-hop album I listened to. Kanye West, College Dropout was cool, but it's not on the level of the stuff I heard in the 90s. You know, don't have the same magic, don't have the same energy. And yeah, I was talking about Big L. Let me just finish up by talking about Big L. Big L. He was one of the most talented rappers I've ever heard in my life. Okay? But he never got around to making an album that really did his skills justice. And actually that came out in the year 2000 as well, which again really and it came out on Raucous. I forgot about that. And he was about to be signed to Jay-Z apparently. Now there is a freestyle which you can listen to if you're interested, or if you haven't heard it before, with Big L and Jay-Z. You can listen to it on YouTube. And in fact, let me see. Yeah. 10-minute version. Go and have a listen to this freestyle, and you will understand what Big L was all about. He was an incredible, incredible rapper. The punchline king, the undisputed punchline king of all time, as far as I'm concerned, Big L. He was incredible with punchlines, and just a very sharp flow. The way he constructed his rhymes was just crazy. One of the most talented rappers of all time. But he didn't live long enough to produce the album that did his talent justice. There were some good tracks on here. The 98 freestyle, where he's talking about turn your tux red, far from broke, got enough bread, and mad hoes, Ox Beavis, I get nothing but head. Crazy. My game is vicious and cruel, fucking bitches is no, my game is vicious and cruel, fucking chicks is a rule. If my bitch think I'm loyal, then that bitch is a fool. Oh, he was too much. Deadly Combination. Ebonics was a massive tune where he broke down the New York street slang. Ebonics was a seminal tune. The Enemy. That was a DITC tune, actually, The Enemy, wasn't it? And they also, because they had it on the DITC album and they had it on his album. Fall Back with Cool G Rap was a great track. And I think one of the best tracks on the whole thing was, where is it now? Platinum Plus with Big Daddy Kane. Because Big L was a big Daddy Kane fan. And that was a tremendous track, man. That was an amazing track. But some of the weaker tracks, Size 'Em Up was weak. That was a pretty weak track. Holding It Down was weak. The Heist was pretty weak. Flamboyant was okay. I wouldn't go as far as saying it was weak, but it was okay. Casualties of a Dice Game was actually a really strong track lyrically, but I don't think the beat really did the track justice. But basically, Casualties of a Dice Game, he's telling a story, and he does it in very, very impressive and vivid fashion. You know, amazing the way he tells that story. But the beat, I don't think was good enough for that track. Who You Sliding With was also weak. Another weak track. Games was weak. The Heist Revisited, weak. The Triborough, that track was alright. You know, it had a good beat, but it was what they used to call a posse cut, a posse tune, a posse track, where you get all your friends together and, you know, they all rap on the beat with you. So the beat was good. That was produced by Showbiz, but it wasn't massively memorable. You know, had Fat Joe, OC, and Remy Ma on it. I remember OC. He used to hang around with Big L a lot, OC, back in the days. And I liked the Big L and OC track. What was it called? What track is it that did on OC's album? Discography. Which album would it have been? Was it Jules? Yeah, it was his Jules album, and it was Dangerous. That was it. Dangerous. Where they sampled some old school funk track, or P-Funk track, whatever it was. Actually, I can't remember what they sampled for it, but it was definitely a classic old sample that they sampled, and Big L just absolutely tore it to pieces on Dangerous. He tore that shit to pieces, just like he did on most of his features, you know, just like he did on most of the DITC tracks, like on DITC Thick. Tore that shit to pieces. Thick, he tore that to pieces day one. He tore that to pieces as well, Big L. He was just such a gifted rapper. But yeah, as I've just explained, his second album had a lot of weak tracks on it. And part of that is to do with the fact that he died before the album was complete. You know, he was killed in the streets. And his brother, who was in prison at the time, he came out of prison and he went looking for the people who killed Big L, and his brother was also murdered. And from what I heard, Big L was killed partly because people wanted to get to his brother who was in prison. So part of the reason they killed Big L was to get to his brother. Not the only reason, but part of the reason was to get to Big L. He was a Harlem rapper, and died at the age of 24, boy. That's unfortunate. Shot 9 times. Back then, Harlem was a war zone. Harlem back then was the roughest place in New York in the early mid-90s. But towards the end of the 90s and the early 2000s is when the gentrification of Harlem started, which I spoke about many years ago. It kind of coincided with the gentrification of Brixton, my hometown, because Brixton was a war zone back in the days, and that got gentrified and turned into like a trendy place for people, you know, all the trendies and yuppies to go out to eat and stuff like that. Same thing has happened to Harlem. Harlem is no longer a war zone. Harlem is one of the safest places now in New York. Quite a trendy place. A lot of yuppies and rich people are moving into Harlem, whereas back in the days it was a no-go area, you know. But Big L was actually in a group called I can't remember what the group was called. Big L had his own little group called Children of the Corn. But he was also in a group with Mace and Cameron, because they're all from Harlem. I can't remember what that group was called off the top of my head. Maybe it will say somewhere in here. Okay, that was Children of the Corn. My bad. The rap group Children of the Corn was with Killer Cam, Cameron, Mace, Bloodshed, and McGruff. Okay, so they were Children of the Corn. Okay. Because he talked about them a lot on Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. Now, this album, I thought was cool. I liked it. You know, I was disappointed actually when I heard this album that it didn't have The Devil's Son on it. The Devil's Son was a track which caused a massive stir at the time. Because at the time in hip hop in the 90s, you could say whatever the fuck you wanted to say. Like, you were not going to really receive too much flack from your record company for coming out and saying some crazy shit, for coming out and saying racist shit, for coming out and saying stuff, you know, advocating terrorism, for coming out saying stuff advocating genocide. You could come out in the night for coming out talking stuff against homosexuals or women or misogynist stuff. You could say anything in hip hop in the 90s and nothing would happen. In fact, it would just boost your sales. It's not like today where anyone says anything controversial and then their whole career is on the line and then they have to apologize. No, in the 90s, it was literally any fucking thing goes. And that was the freedom of it in the 90s. You could say anything. It was truly the most expressive art form, hip hop back then. You could say whatever the hell you want, whatever opinion you have, you could come out and say it and your career won't be destroyed because of it. So that was the freedom of it. You know, people were talking about fuck the police and people were talking about, you know, whatever the hell they wanted to talk about with no problems. But this particular album was cool. I was disappointed that Devil's Son wasn't on it because Devil's Son was, you know, pushing the boundaries in terms of people saying whatever the fuck they want. I mean, you had people like DMX and Cameron in some of their tunes talking about killing children. Yeah. Just to show you what I'm talking about in terms of people saying whatever the fuck they wanted to. And I'm not advocating what they were saying, but I'm just telling you back then, it was that kind of environment in hip hop where you could say anything and nothing's going to happen to you. DMX was releasing albums on Def Jam, a major label, and he was talking about killing children. Crazy. Same thing with Cameron, you know, madness. And Devil's Son was pushing it, so I was always interested in. I always wanted to get hold of Devil's Son because I only ever had like a shitty copy on cassette. But this album, when I looked for Big L's album, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous, Devil's Son was not on it. That was only on a vinyl, I believe. But Put It On was a cool tune. MVP I did not like. They used that sample, the same sample that Biggie used for One More Chance, which was fucking, you know, they used it on MVP in a horrible way. It sounded awful. No Ends, No Skins. Yeah, that was cool, I guess. 8 Is Enough. I liked 8 Is Enough. I liked the beat. All Black was cool. Danger Zone was cool. Street Struck, I guess, was interesting. The Graveyard was cool. Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. Don't understand it later. I mean, it was an okay album, but you're not going to try and tell me that Big L, Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous was a classic hip hop album. It wasn't. He just didn't live long enough to put a classic out. He would have put he had classics in him, but he just didn't live long enough. You know, they could have put him with some better producers and better rappers too. To help him produce a classic album. He just never made it there. And Jay-Z was about to sign him, so yeah, sad. Listen to the Jay-Z Big L freestyle. He destroys Jay-Z on that freestyle. They're going back to back. He fucking murks him. Crazy. Anyway, yeah, this has gone on long enough with me rambling incoherently here, jumping all over the damn place. So that's pretty much it. My story as a hip-hop fan, my journey. There's far too many other artists to talk about, from, you know, J. Rue the Damager and all the other artists I've briefly mentioned. I just don't have enough time to talk about it all. But hopefully you've got some kind of picture in terms of my favorite artists from that era and what the music meant to me at the time. I think I'll do a separate video about producers because that should be much more straightforward and it should be easier for me to do than the rappers because I've been just jumping around all over the place. I tried to follow a timeline, but it's very difficult because I forget certain artists and other artists come out of the back of my memory and I remember it all of a sudden and start getting sidetracked. So yeah, anyway, hopefully those of you who are hip hop heads got something from this. And after the year 2000, as I say, haven't really been paying much attention to hip hop. The odd rapper here and there, you know, bit of Kanye. In fact, after the year 2000 is when I really started getting into grime. And, you know, I listened to Garage during the Soul Solid era. Obviously I was listening to Bashment, you know, dancehall, Jamaican dancehall Bashment. Grime. Bit of drum and bass, garage. But in terms of hip hop, UK hip hop I started listening to at some point. Actually, I was listening to UK hip hop in the 90s. Black Twang, Roots Maneuver, Skinny Man, Mud Fam, Mark B and Blade, Ty, Rodney P, London Posse. That's probably a whole other video or a whole other podcast. Listen to, you know, talking about all that stuff. Because that went from the 90s all the way through to the 2000s as well. You know, Black Twang and all them people there. So anyway, let me stop this right here. And maybe I'll continue it and talk about other aspects in part 2, part 3, etc. Yeah, I'm out.